All right, cool beans. Let's get started. So, all right, thanks guys for coming. I thought that it would be nice for us, like every year, to just get a proper preparation for Pesach, because Pesach is got so much going on that it usually floods us and drowns you. And before you know it, the 7 days are passed, and you've just finished your first box of matzah. So I thought let's get some preparation going for the next few weeks. So tonight we're going to start just with an overview of Pesach, the biblical commandments and how it's set up on the calendar, and a little bit about how it was practiced in the temple times. And then hopefully next week we can do the tough one, which you should all be dreading for, is the one about chometz and how to clean your house and how to kasher your dishes and how to get all that sorted out. So that's next week hopefully. And then the rest of the weeks we'll concentrate 1 week just on the Haggadah, the Pesach Seder, that meal that we have on Pesach night. And there's a whole bunch of topics we can discuss the next week and the week thereafter. I don't know, we've only got 4 weeks I think before Pesach hits us. Right, so get ready and get scared. Okay, so Pesach is the big one when it comes to the festivals, right? So all the other ones are, they're pretty big, but Pesach is the biggest one, the most going on around Pesach. And even in non-religious Jewish homes, if there's anything they do growing up as Jews, is that they have a Pesach Seder, to at least remind them of the Exodus from Egypt. And one of the main reasons for that is because it's a commandment to teach your children of what happened in the Exodus. So we fulfill this commandment through a whole bunch of extra things that we do on that Pesach Seder night specifically. So why should we study Pesach? The Torah devotes more commandments to the festival of Pesach than any other commandment or festival in the entire Torah. It's really like the biggest thing of the Torah as well. There are 24 specific mitzvahs only for the festival of Pesach, out of the 613, right? Not to mention all the rabbinic laws as well. So it goes much more than 24. So the Shulchan Aruch advises us, saying, one should start studying the laws of Pesach 30 days before the festival. So when was 30 days before Pesach? Purim. Close, yeah. Purim, right? So on Purim we spoke about the redemption and how the redemption of Purim and the redemption of Pesach are kind of intermingled and how Purim prepares us for Pesach. So let's carry on learning, and tonight we're going to go through a bunch of stuff. So I thought for us to get started, maybe it would be good just to read the verses, right? Because I don't know how many of you have read the verses yet, because Pesach is still far enough away where you don't have to have a panic attack just yet. So maybe you guys haven't started preparing, so I thought let's just read a few of them. We'll start off with Leviticus 23 is of course the one where all the festivals are found in the Torah, right? So from verse 5 it starts off by saying, in the first month, on the 14th day of the month. What month are we in now, by the way? Yeah, it's not Ahir, it's Adar. Okay, the month of Adar. So this coming Shabbos, by the way, this Shabbos is Shabbos Mevrachim. We welcome in the new month this week. Okay. So on the 14th day of the month, between sundown and complete darkness, comes Pesach for Hashem. On the 15th day of the same month is the festival of Matzah. For 7 days you are to eat Matzah. Can't wait, eh? On the first day you are to have a holy convocation. Do not do any kind of ordinary work. Bring an offering made by fire to Hashem for 7 days. On the 7th day is a holy convocation. Do not do any kind of ordinary work. Now, usually you read this and you think, oh, thank goodness, I get to take leave from work for religious reasons. This year, however, Pesach falls on a Shabbos. So, there's one day that you can't take this year, unfortunately, for religious leave. Let's read another one, talking about the Exodus, Pesach. This one's Exodus 12. This one's going to be a mix between the original Pesach and our commandments to keep the Pesach today. This is a long section. So this is from Exodus 12. It says, Hashem spoke to Moshe and Aharon in the land of Egypt. He said, you are to begin your calendar with this month. It will be the first month of the year for you. Speak to all the assembly of Israel and say, on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb or kid for his family, one per household, except that if the household is too small for a whole lamb or kid. You can see these weren't Bura. Because otherwise you take 2 lambs for a household. Then he and his next door neighbor should share one, dividing it in proportion to the number of people eating it. Your animal must be without defect, a male in its first year, and you may choose it from either the sheep or the goats. You are to keep it until the 14th day of the month, and then the entire assembly of the community of Israel will slaughter it at dusk. So good advice is not to give it a name during those 4 days. Don't grow attached to the poor thing that's living in your house for 4 days. They are to take some of the blood and smear it on the 2 sides of the top of the doorframe at the entrance of the house in which they eat it. That night they are to eat the meat, roasted in the fire, and they are to eat it with matzah and maror. Don't eat it raw or boiled, but roasted in the fire with its head, the lower parts of its legs, and its inner organs. Let nothing of it remain till morning. If any of it does remain, burn it up completely. No leftovers, eh? Here is how, what do they call it? Sloppy Joe the next morning, eh? Here is how you are to eat it, with your belt fastened, which is difficult after the meal. But before the meal, you can still fasten your belt. Your shoes on your feet and your staff in your hand, and you are to eat it hurriedly, right? Not like your parents tell you to usually eat, right? Usually you have to chew your food before you swallow, otherwise you choke. It is Hashem's Pesach. For that night I will pass through the land of Egypt and kill all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both men and animals, and I will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt. I am Hashem. The blood will serve you as a sign, marking the houses where you are. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, and when I strike the land of Egypt, the death blow will not strike you. This will be a day for you to remember and celebrate as a festival to Hashem. From generation to generation, dor la dor, you are to celebrate it by a perpetual regulation. So when do we stop celebrating the festivals? When Jesus comes. No, never. Perpetual regulation. For 7 days you are to eat matzah. On the first day, remove the leaven from your houses. For whoever eats chametz from the first to the 7th day is to be cut off from Israel. On the 1st and the 7th days you are to have an assembly set aside for God. On these days no work is to be done except what each must do to prepare his food. You may do only that. You are to observe the festival of matzah. It's a long section, eh? For on this very day I brought your divisions out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you are to observe this day from generation to generation by a perpetual regulation. From the evening of the 14th day of the first month until the evening of the 21st day, you are to eat matzah. During those 7 days no leaven is to be found in your houses, just in case someone's going to send an inspector. Whoever eats food with chametz in it is to be cut off from the community of Israel. Doesn't matter whether he is a foreigner or a citizen of the land. Eat nothing with chametz in it. Wherever you live, eat matzah. Okay, cool. Did you guys catch that? So what do we know? What do we learn from that? Well, first of all, Pesach is a 7-day festival, right? Which other festival is also 7 days long? Sukkot, yeah, Sukkot. So Pesach and Sukkot are kind of like two sides of a symmetrical balance, basically. Another thing is that it's in the month of Nisan. Which day does Pesach begin? The 14th or the 15th. It's a confusing one. Because in the afternoon of the 14th we bring the sacrifice, but then it begins the 15th of Nisan. So it's 14th or 15th, traveling right through to the 21st of Nisan. We are commanded to have no chometz on this during the whole 7 days, right? Meaning, basically, no bread, no cookies, no pies. Some people say nothing nice. I disagree with that.
What about cheese?
What about cheese? You get kosher for Pesach cheese.
It's also made from culture.
Yes.
Bacteria, which is very similar to
But you're allowed to have bacteria.
in other words, I think they call it kefir.
What's good?
Kefir is made salmon.
Yeah? Okay?
To make yogurt, it's bacteria. And it's also mixed gas.
That's completely fine. So when it comes to chometz, we'll learn about chometz in next week's lesson. The prohibition on chometz only applies to 5 types of grain, specifically, nothing else. So it's wheat, oats, rye, barley, and I'm missing something. Wheat, oats, rye, spelt. Spelt is the other one. Those are the only 5 things which can cause chometz. So mealies, for example, you can make mealie meal, right? It's kosher for Pesach, unless of course you don't eat kitniot. We'll talk about that next week. Chometz is next week's lesson. Right, so chometz, it's not just yeast, because here's the problem. People think it's yeast, but it's not, because the air itself permanently carries yeast. Right? The ladies that have baked the bread before will know that you can sometimes get something rise without adding any yeast at all. So that still has a fermentation process. So the process itself is the problem. So when you make matzah, or when you make bread, or when you make something on Pesach, our rabbis have got a strict timing regulation for us. We have to make sure that it's baked within the first 18 minutes of that grain coming into contact with water. So chometz is actually the fermentation process. But we'll study that more next week, and we'll discuss which it applies and which foods. So for now, your yogurt and your cheese is fine. But you do get special kosher for Pesach cheese, because there's certain things they add in there that are not kosher for Pesach. For example, tomato sauce. You can't use normal old gold and these types of tomato sauces in Pesach neither. because they've got an agent that helps it thicken that contains chometz in it. So for Pesach, you'll see you get this horrible, slimy, runny tomato sauce. You can't make yourself a hot dog, but you shouldn't be making a hot dog with a matzah anyway. It's just a bad idea. Why? It's not polony, it's fine. It's not phony baloney. Yeah, okay. So no chometz for these 7 days. You should also eat matzah for these 7 days, right? You guys know what matzah is. Who doesn't know what matzah is? A bunch of you haven't been here before for Pesach. So here's a few boxes of matzah. Right, there's a picture of matzah, there's a picture there on the side as well. This is the standard plain matzah. Some people get creative, and now you've got matzah with honey, and you got other flavored matzahs. Matzah with honey, I think, might be a problem actually. If it's not got a kosher for Pesach hechsher, then it's not kosher for Pesach. Because honey sometimes they also add things that might have. This one is non kosher, I think. Sonko for Pesach. Yeah. Someone brought it and I see someone taped it closed. Good on you. Alright, but you can also make your own flavored matzahs at home. We do that every year. We make like spicy ones and we make chocolate matzahs and it's very nice. It's very, very nice. Okay. And we know that the first day of the festival and the 7th day of the festival are Sabbaths. What do we call a Sabbath that's on a weekday? What's the term we use for it? A Yom Tov. Some people call it a high Sabbath, but we usually call it a Yom Tov. So you'll see like other festivals that we've had here previously that haven't been on a Saturday. It's still been a Sabbath on the weekday, but we call it a Yom Tov. So I want to spend some time looking at the calendar. Yeah, carry on. Go ahead. Not this year. I haven't planned one, unless you want to run one. We'll check around. Maybe we can get one. Maybe. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so I'll look at the calendar. This is this year's calendar. By the way, you guys can go on this website. This was on hebcal.com. Hebrew calendar. hebcal.com. You can choose your country, you can choose which dates you want, you can choose if you want the Hebrew dates and the normal dates. And you can make your own calendar for the whole year ahead basically, and you can just download it for free. Very, very cool. So I went to do this today, and I decided to show us this year's setup for Pesach. Okay. So Pesach is on which day of Nisan? Nisan. Okay, March 30th, 14th of Nisan. So remember how a Hebrew date works, right? From the evening, this is the beginning of the 15th of Nisan. Right, remember that. So this is this year's Pesach. Pesach falls on a Friday night through a Saturday this year, which by the way, according to my opinion, is exactly how it worked at the time that Yeshua was crucified as well. So we're actually privileged to be able to practice it this way this year. Maybe we'll concentrate a bit more on the gospel stories this year. Maybe we should do that as one of our sessions preparing, just work out the year of Yeshua's crucifixion, how the Pesach was done that day. And that's why they call it Good Friday, because Friday was a crucifixion, it's different. And Easter Sunday, but I don't think you'll find Easter Sunday on a kosher calendar. They'll make up some other name for it, because it's a public holiday, right? So they'll make up a name for it. Anyway, so Pesach starts on that day, the 15th, that is the Sabbath. Now, it's also a Yom Tov. Usually we'd worry about that because it's a weekday. This year it falls on a Sabbath, so it's not a problem, right? All the normal Sabbath laws apply, plus we have a few extra things that we'll do on the day, just because it is Pesach. So that Friday night begins Pesach, and it goes through till the end of the day. Now keep in mind that outside of Israel, we also tend, in Orthodox communities, tend to keep the second day of the festival as a Sabbath as well. I've made these red, first day and the 7th day red, so we can see the biblical commandment. But the calendar itself, you see those orange lines? That's Pesach day 1. There is Pesach day 2 on that Sunday. So Orthodox communities, you'll find synagogues also having services on that day and keeping that as a Yom Tov as well. No work, no fires, only making your food. Same happens with the 7th day. 7th day, there's your Yom Tov, but they've also got a Yom Tov on the Saturday. And I think this year what we'll do is, we won't have a service on the Sunday, but our Saturday service is going to be on the 8th day of Pesach. And we're going to do an 8th day service because some of us still keep the 8th day. So we'll be keeping an 8th day service and do the prayers for the 8th day, and we'll still be eating matzah on that Shabbat. So don't come here and think you're going to get halal. Okay, we'll still be eating matzah. The reason why we do the 2 days festival goes back to temple times. It actually goes back to Esther even. We read it in the Purim story, in the book of Esther, that she went and had a festival for the king and for Haman. And remember, she invited them 2 days in a row for a party. Which days was it? You go and read this text, it's actually Pesach. So she keeps a 2-day festival because she was outside the land of Israel, which is why we keep the 2-day festival. She does it back then already. So the reason for that is that back in those days they didn't have cell phones and they didn't have CNN, which is fake news by the way, but they didn't have news channels, so they didn't know when the new moon was, so they didn't know when the festival would begin. So what they did was they always kept it over 2 days so that they don't miss it. So today that we can't overrule that ruling, so it still applies today. They call it 2 heads being better than 1. But anyway, so there you go. So that's the first day and the 7th day. The 7th day is also a Sabbath. So you're also going to be doing candle lighting on that Thursday night, the 5th of April. And that Friday, hopefully you guys have taken off from work and cancelled all your appointments. But you're going to be here in shul, busy praying the whole time. 7th day is the day that we crossed the Red Sea. By the way. So we have a special reading on that day as well. Okay, so this Friday, before Pesach begins, is called Erev Pesach. You can see it written here. Erev Pesach. Right? Erev Pesach means just before Pesach, the day before Pesach. It's basically the preparation day where you get your house and yourself ready for the festival of Pesach. That's why the Gospels also say that Yeshua was crucified on the preparation day. Okay? So it's the preparation day for the Chag, for the festival. So, there's another thing written here called Ta'anis Barochos. Who knows what that means? Ta'anis Barochos. You might think it's a bunch of bunnies doing blessings. Berachoros. Ta'anis Berachoros. Yes, it's the firstborn fast on this day. It's a biblical commandment. That, the firstborn shall fast on this day. But there's a way to override it though. But for those of you that are firstborn sons in your family, if you were the first that came out of the womb, obviously from only your mother, but anyway, I want to say either your mother or your father. But if you're the firstborn from either your mother or your father's side, because after divorce they can get remarried and you still have 2 different firstborns, right? You should fast on that day. Now, Judaism has got a very cool trick to get out of it. There's another commandment or rabbinic commandment that talks about when you finish studying a chapter of like the Talmud, then you celebrate, and you have to have a celebratory meal. Right? It's a Seudah mitzvah to have this celebratory meal. So what they do is to get over this fast, so you don't have to fast on that Friday, is that morning in the synagogues, they finish a tractate of the Talmud, so everyone has to eat. So you do your fast until prayer service, right after prayer service you finish the Talmud, and then you break the fast. So that's what they do nowadays. Now, I don't have to fast because I'm not a firstborn, but I have in recent years, taken this fast upon myself. Reason being, there's a Jewish custom that your Rebbe that you follow, the day that he passes away, the day that he dies, is his Yarzeit. And every year you remember that day by fasting on that day and lighting a candle in memory of the Rebbe. So for me and for you guys hopefully, who have Yeshua as our one and only Rebbe, that's the day he passed away. So that's Yeshua's Yarzeit. So I like to fast on that day in any way because of the ultimate firstborn son who was crucified on that day. But you guys are welcome to just do the whole thing about studying something in the morning and then skipping it. Yes, Friday morning to Friday night. I did not have the times in here, unfortunately. But it should be on a good Jewish calendar that I didn't set up. So the times will be there. Okay, so that is the outline of the week of Pesach, right? Now, the Pesach sacrifice itself, the lamb that we would sacrifice, we would be doing here on the Friday afternoon, right here, between lunchtime and candle lighting for the festival. That's when everyone in Jerusalem would go and do that Pesach sacrifice. And interesting enough, that's also the time where Yeshua passed away, right? The Talmud says you should do the sacrifice in the 9th hour of the day, which basically means in the afternoon around 3 o'clock. That's the same time that Yeshua passed away. The Gospels tell us that he passed away at the 9th hour. Okay? In the morning, you would actually burn your last chametz that you have in your house. And that's the same time that Yeshua was actually hung on the cross. So all of these things actually kind of play into each other. Okay. And then in the afternoons, after lunchtime, you would come and do your Pesach sacrifice and take it home. And that night, you would have your Pesach Seder. We just read the commandment that you shall eat it with matzah and you shall eat it with maror. What is maror? Bitter herbs, basically, yeah. Or even lettuce. Lettuce is fine. Like the bitter herbs, yeah. The lettuce is there just to make the bitter herbs taste better. Okay. But we'll talk about that. Potato and onions, yeah. It's easier than cleaning the lettuce with all the bugs on it. Yeah. Okay, so that's the week. Now, the intermediate days, between the first day and the 7th day, we call them Chol HaMu'ed. Say it together. Chol HaMoed. That's pretty good. Alright. Not Chol HaMoed. Right? Chol HaMoed. Okay. Now, Chol HaMoed are normal days. You are allowed to go to work during these days. Right? Don't use it as a religious excuse to get out of work. You're allowed to go to work. But they are still semi-festive days. So you shouldn't work as hard as you usually do. Okay. There's an excuse for you guys. So on that day we do special things. For example, we don't have to put on tefillin anymore because we're celebrating them as a festival. So it is already a sign for us. There's a few extra prayers we do on Chol HaMoed. We add something to our Amidah as well. But at the same time we do still go to work. But we enjoy it. It's a time of inviting friends over and celebrating the Pesach story as well. Okay, after Pesach, let's actually start before Pesach. The Shabbat before Pesach is a special Sabbath. Remember we've been having a special Sabbath lately. We've had Shabbat Zachor, right? We've had Shabbat Shekalim as well. This coming Shabbos is called Shabbat Parah. There's nothing to do with frogs. Parah is the Hebrew for the red heifer, the red cow. So that's this coming Shabbos. So it's called Shabbat Parah. And then the next one there on the 24th is a special Sabbath called Shabbos Hagadol, the great Sabbath. Now, Shabbos Hagadol actually celebrates the 10th of Nisan. What happened on the 10th of Nisan? Ah, yes. That's when they went to go select the lamb and bring it into their house, right? 4 days before Pesach. But if you look at the calendar, the 10th of Nisan is over here on the Monday. But we're celebrating Shabbos HaGadol on the Saturday. And every year, we celebrate the 10th of Nisan on a Saturday, even though the 10th of Nisan is hardly ever on that Saturday. Why? Anyone know why? Why not? So here's the reason, it's a weird one. The original 10th of Nisan, right? The original... Busy, eh? You can take it off and keep it with you, yeah. The original 10th of Nisan, way back when we had to do the whole Pesach thing in Egypt, that was on a Sabbath day. Okay? And there was a great miracle that happened on the 10th of Nisan. That was the day we took the lambs into our houses. Is that normal or is that weird? In Egypt, it's quite weird. Why?
Because the lamb is seen as a god.
Yeah, in Egypt, lamb is a deity. It's a god. So what happened was the Egyptians were watching us take their lambs into our houses. And they wanted to say something, but they couldn't do anything. They were powerless. You know, like those dreams where you see stuff and you can't do anything. And you wake up in the bed wet. Those are horrible things. Right.
But it was a horrible thing in Egypt.
Exactly. And they couldn't do anything about it. So there was a great miracle that happened on that day, the 10th of Nisan, and it happened on a Sabbath. So we remember the Sabbath before Pesach as Shabbos Hagadol every single year. Why not on the 10th of Nisan? Because something else happened on the 10th of Nisan. Another miracle. Any guesses? So after the Exodus, when we want to enter the land of Israel, remember Joshua took us in and the sea split. The Jordan split, sorry. The Jordan split also on the 10th of Nisan. So we don't want to replace the two of them by saying one miracle is greater than the other one. And if we were to make a special day for the splitting of the Jordan, it would look like the splitting of the sea wasn't such a big deal. So we celebrate the Shabbos Hagadol because it was a Shabbos that God gave us this miracle. And right after that, He gave us the commandment to keep the Sabbath, by the way, instead of on the 10th of Nisan itself. Okay. Right, then you got Pesach. Pesach ends, the 7th day ends on the Friday afternoon, the candle lighting. But because we're outside of Israel, we keep it till the Saturday. Pesach will end on that Saturday night after Havdalah. So that's Pesach this year. And after that, we start preparing ourselves for Shavuot. Then it's the countdown. We count 7 weeks of days till Shavuot. 50 days, 29 days later, we celebrate the festival of Shavuot. Okay, so that's this year's calendar. Okay. If you find anyone else telling you about a different calendar, please stay away because you're not practicing that religion. You're not creating new religion. No. Capish? Okay. So, let's get into this. 10th of Nisan, Shabbat Hagadol. 14th of Nisan, the Pesach sacrifice done in the afternoon. The 15th of Nisan is the beginning, Pesach day 1, it's a Yom Tov. And the 21st of Nisan is Pesach day 7, also a Yom Tov. Now, today we call the whole festival Pesach, but the word Pesach in the Torah actually only refers to the sacrificial lamb itself. That thing right there, that is Pesach. Right? Over time, we've decided to call the whole festival Pesach. It's one of those things that just happens. We've shortened it. Because Pesach has 3 names in the Torah. It's called mostly Chag HaMatzos, the festival of Matzos, or Chag HaMatzi. It's also called Chag Aviv. What does that mean? No. What is Aviv? Yes, it's the name of the month. It's not one of our ministers. Don't we have a minister called Aviv? Aviv means spring. Right, so it's the month of spring. So it's the festival of spring, and that's why our calendar is set up in such a way with all the leap years, so that Pesach always falls in the springtime in the land of Israel. Okay, that's why we have those leap months and leap years. So, and the last one it's called is Chag HaPesach, which means the festival of the Pesach sacrifice. So what we've done is we've got lazy over the years, and now we've just shortened it down and called it, it's Pesach. Okay, so when you read the Torah and when you read Pesach, it's speaking specifically about the lamb. What happened to the lamb? Yeah. Okay. Let's keep on moving. Aviv barley. Yeah, this means the time basically. Aviv means spring. Yeah. We're going to go back one. That's what happens when lamb gets listeriosis. Okay, now you. Isn't it two Shakot and Shemini Etzeret? Is there another name? There's the other one. Hoshana Rabbah is also in there. Yeah. Hoshana Yom Kippur. It's also 3 in 1. You can do a Trinity teaching here if you'd like. 3 in 1. Okay, but it's important to notice that there's a difference between Pesach in Egypt and Pesach in Mzansi, right, today here in South Africa. There's differences. For example, on the 10th of Nisan in the land of Egypt, they had to go and select a lamb so that it stays with you in your house. That was a once-off mitzvah that will never apply again. It doesn't apply today. We don't have to fulfill that mitzvah. Once off, right? Today on the 10th of Nisan, well, we remember it through Shabbos Haggadah, right? Shabbat Haggadah. On the 14th of Nisan, they would go and slaughter the lamb and apply its blood to their doorposts. We do not do that today. That is also a once-off mitzvah that will never apply again. Instead, on the 14th of Nisan, we prepare our Seder, we prepare the meal, we clean our house of chometz, and in fact, the night before, Erev 14, we do a ceremony called Bedikat Chometz. What does that mean? Finding your chometz that is Bedikat. Bedikat Chometz basically it's the practice of going at night. Yes? Yes, exactly. So at the night what you do is you take the last bit of chometz you have left in your house and you put it in little bags and you hide it throughout the house, and the kids do a treasure hunt to go and find the last chometz. This is like the original Easter egg hunt going on here. Mind you, I think it falls in line with Easter this year. So that's the original Easter egg hunt. Right? And what they do is they actually go with a candle. This is how the Talmud tells you to do it. You go with a candle, and you go with a feather and a wooden spoon. And there's reasons for that, but over the years our halachic authorities have said it's even better if you go with a flashlight because it'll be easier for you to find it, which is the whole purpose, right? You don't want to make something that is, oh cute, they got a feather, and then they end up losing the chometz and it's got in your house for the whole 7 days, and you need to be cut off.
But I like, they say, even if you can organize it, it's still the light.
Yes. So it's symbolic as well for ourselves and how we're supposed to look at inside ourselves, in all the nooks and crannies, in the darkest corners. Find that light that's within you to illuminate the chometz, which is not necessarily a bad thing, depending on how you use it, right? But many times you've heard the leaven of malice or the leaven of hypocrisy. Those kind of things you want to find. Because a little leaven leavens the whole bunch. Yeah. Right. Cool. So that's what we do nowadays. They would have to eat it in haste with their belt, shoes, and staff. We, however, go on until about midnight every Pesach. It's the latest night of the year because there's just so much reading and talking and stuff to do that people always get very angry. They don't realize how long it goes on. So that's why in this year's invite, I'm going to put there from 6 p.m. till late. I'm going to give you a time when we'll finish. Okay. On the 15th of Nisan, they would run for their lives because they came out of Egypt. On the 15th of Nisan, we run to shul, right? And we stand here all day and we pray and we daven and we sing some nice songs. We do a few beautiful prayers that are specifically written for Pesach. And so too on the 21st of Nisan, the 7th day of the Yom Tov as well. So chometz we'll deal with next week. This commandment that says, Exodus 12:15, whoever eats chometz from the 1st to the 7th day is to be cut off from Israel. What does that mean? What does it mean to be cut off? Yeah? Pretty much. You're not going to be human anymore. Cut off is basically kaput. Death penalty. Permanently. it's. Hey? Yeah? Yes? No, you deserve to be cut off, but no Sanhedrin has cut you off yet, so you're still lucky. You have another chance this year. Now you know. Yeah. Ignorance is bliss. Don't tell your friends, basically. Alright, here's another command. Oh, by the way, it says it doesn't matter if he is a foreigner or citizen of the land. Exodus 34 verse 25 says, you are not to offer the blood of my sacrifice, that's that Pesach sacrifice, with leavened bread. So if you still have leavened bread in your possession, our rabbis tell us, Pesach sacrifice is not accepted. Not even allowed to own it. Okay. So no chometz from mid-morning of the 14th of Nisan. So this year you can have your breakfast, you can have your last chometz, but then around about 10 a.m. on that Friday morning, you've got to be done with chometz. You've got to burn it, actually. If you go to Israel on Pesach, you'll see this in the streets. Everyone goes out and makes little fires and burns their chometz for the last time. Because there's a commandment that says, you shall destroy the chometz. So they actually burn it. Yes. Halachically, there is a loophole that our rabbis have created. Because they realized that something like whiskey gets better every year. Right? The older the whiskey, the better. And there's chometz in whiskey. So if you've got a 150-year-old whiskey that you bought for about $5 million, you don't want to become religious and then you can't have your whiskey anymore. Yes, there's quite a lot. There's a list of it. So what I'll try and do is I'll get booklets. Every year our Orthodox Union prints booklets with a list of kosher liquors for Pesach and a list of medicine that's also kosher for Pesach. Because a lot of medicine has chometz in it as well. And a list of normal products you'll get as well. So I'll try and get hold of those as soon as I start putting them out in the shops or get them for download. I'll give you guys a look. Usually Pick and Pay has a bunch of them. I go there every week now because they've got a special where you can, if you buy at the Pick and Pay hypers, every 100 rand you spend you get a sticker. And if you get enough stickers, you get a new pot, new set of pots. And then I don't have to kasher my Pesach stuff. I can just get new pots. Yeah, if you buy fast enough. Yeah? Muesli. Yes. Yes. But you get kosher for Pesach granola. I got last year. It's hectic expensive, but it's delicious. What they do is they take matzah and they dry it up and they add with it a few different grains that you're allowed to have that are not unkosher for Pesach. So you can get it on Pesach.
I try and start shopping close to Pesach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because they have their aisles.
Yes.
At
In Johannesburg.
because it's free, because you're a good guy of what you can.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll show you maybe next week. I'll put a picture up of the logo. The logo that you have to look for to make sure stuff is kosher for Pesach. In fact, we've probably got something here in the cupboard. I'll show you guys afterwards. Usually you've got a O for Orthodox Union, but there's a small little P next to it. That P stands for Passover. Yeah, it's fine. Ask as many questions as you want. Matzah. With a honey in it.
That's why I'm just wondering. I'm under correction now,
Yeah?
but I'm almost sure what was
So, there's another thing. Cut off. You also get something else called egg matzah. So what they do is they mix the matzah with egg so it's softer, so it doesn't. Many people have problems swallowing matzah. But our rabbis tell us that for the sake of this Pesach Seder, the first night, we have a commandment that says, you shall guard the matzah. So shomer hamatzah. So you get today something called shmura matzah, which is the price is through the roof for special matzah that's been watched from it's been harvested till it's been baked, till it's been packed by a rabbi, so that there's no chance of water coming into contact with it. So on the first night you try and eat straightforward matzah. No honey matzah, no egg matzah, none of that stuff. After the first night you can start having that stuff. Okay, but we'll chat about chometz next week. That's a chat on its own. So let's chat a little bit more about this Pesach lamb. We do not eat Pesach lamb today for our seders. This is a misconception that the Hebrew Roots movement has brought in because they just read the Bible and do whatever they want to because they haven't learned about it. They haven't learned the context. We don't eat Pesach at your lamb at your Pesach seder today. Understand? Reason being, the Pesach lamb was set aside specifically for that commandment. Plus, the commandment is to go to the temple. There's actually a specific commandment for Pesach saying, you shall not offer the Pesach lamb anywhere outside the temple. So, if you are serving lamb at your Pesach Seder, you're making it look as if you went and did a Pesach sacrifice of a lamb. So, it's forbidden by our rabbis. It's not forbidden by the Torah, right? But this is one of those fences we put up not to break the Torah. And by the time the Talmud was written, they would say that those who actually would eat lamb on Pesach were considered as heretics. So, we'll try and cut you off basically. So, a lot of us, I remember the first time we ever did Pesach, we had these beautiful lamb shanks. Oh, it was so nice. But that's not what we're supposed to do. So keep that in mind, you won't find that. A good meal is either brisket or chicken. Yeah, case of a Pesach lamb, but not for the Seder. Not for the Friday night Seder. Yes, because on the Seder you would eat the sacrifice. So it represents the sacrifice. So the rest of Pesach you're allowed to. You don't have to send your lamb back. Thank goodness. Ampor. Ampor. Alright, so in the temple times, you wouldn't necessarily bring your own lamb from your backyard. You would go to the temple, and the temple had its own little kraal. Well, not little, but large. Of Pesach lambs. And you would go and pick your lamb there, and you'd actually say the statement, behold the lamb, which is what they said to Yeshua when he came into Jerusalem, right? You would say, behold the lamb, and you'd pick your lamb, and you would take that to the sacrifice. Reason being, one of the commandments we just read was that your lamb shall be unblemished. There shall be nothing wrong with it. If you're traveling from the southern tip of Israel up to Jerusalem to go do your Pesach sacrifice, and you walk your lamiki all the way, somewhere he's going to knock something, or break something, right? And then he's now blemished, and you can't sacrifice him anymore. So you'd go to the temple and you'd buy your lamb right there and give it to them as a sacrifice.
They say those lambs come from Bethlehem.
Yeah, that's where they used to graze.
That's when the Bethlehem.
Yeah. In a place, there's a name for that place. It's called Migdal Eder. Tower of something. All right. Offered in the afternoon of the 14th, right? The 9th hour. Yes, question.
So the 14th starts
Thursday night. Thursday night.
Thursday night.
Yes. So you're still allowed to clean your chometz out on the 14th, that night in the morning, but the afternoon, right as the sun turns basically, from 12 p.m., that becomes the afternoon. From then on, we are now doing our Pesach sacrifice. And remember the commandment said, you're not allowed to have any chometz in your possession when you bring the blood. So you're not allowed to have any chometz in your possession by that time.
That's why they call it the preparation day. Preparation day.
What's that?
I just wanted to check for people like me who now live somewhere who won't be keeping favor.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
So by accident, forget the fire on and burn the house down. This is one way. Make sure you got good insurance. Try and tell them that for religious reasons you would love to do this. Just a week without any chometz. They won't know what chometz is, so just tell them without bread.
Like what you drink one month.
Yeah, it's quite a fun exercise actually. Yeah, that's the thing. If you make a nice menu for that week, people will appreciate it. They'll see all the effort you put in. Vegetables and fish for the whole week. Alright, so the time of the sacrifice, the time of the Pesach sacrifice is a bit of a problem. So it's supposed to be in the afternoon, but remember, we've got a commandment to have a continual offering in the morning and in the afternoons. The Tamid offering. Every morning in the temple they would do a sacrifice, and every afternoon in the temple they would do a sacrifice. So we want to make sure that this sacrifice doesn't clash with our afternoon sacrifice. So the times for our afternoon sacrifices are from any time from where the sun reaches its pinnacle and starts going downwards till sunset. Now usually we do it a lot later, but specifically on Pesach, and specifically like this year where it's on a Friday, they would do the afternoon sacrifice as early as possible, halachically possible, which would be pretty much 1 minute after 12. Then they would do that sacrifice so that we can start with our thousands and thousands and thousands of people that need to do their Pesach sacrifices on that afternoon. Can you imagine what it was like in Jerusalem? Chaos. Now check this out. You actually had to register your Pesach lamb. Right? Justin went to go register his daughter today. It's also very complicated, right? But also your Pesach lamb you would have to register as well because of the commandment. Exodus 12 verse 4 that says, and if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his nearest neighbor shall take according to the number of persons. According to what each can eat, you shall make your count for the lamb. So our rabbis went and derived a commandment from this, that you shall register each person who is going to eat from that lamb. So in temple times, you would actually go and you would say, I want to register for Tani Sani and for Yaku and wara. And you'd name each person that is going to partake of that lamb. If someone wasn't mentioned when you went to go register, they're not allowed to eat of that lamb. Yeah, there's a bunch of halakha. For example, say now someone, a lady's father goes and registers her, but she's married. And her husband registers her as well for a different lamb. There's halakha about that. She has to eat the lamb that her husband registered for, because her father's already let her go. Okay. So that's interesting. You actually have to go and register for your lamb. Reason being as well, it helps you prepare for how to make it a smooth motion, so we finish all the sacrifices before the sun sets. Now, there goes the lamb again. Okay. The way that the sacrifice was done on that afternoon, because it was such a mission, was in 3 different groups. You had 3 time slots that you had to choose from, depending on how early you come to register. That's why it's called the 3 shifts of laity, depending on how lazy you are. Yeah. The ones that came for the last shift were seen as the lazy people. Yeah. Okay. So this is why Exodus 12 verse 6 tells us we should make 3 shifts apparently. It says you are to keep it until the 14th day of the month, and then the entire assembly of the community of Israel will slaughter it at dusk. So there are 3 groups that are coming to do the Pesach sacrifice in this verse, and our rabbis use that to derive the understanding that in the temple we have 3 different shifts where you can come bring your Pesach lamb. And when you register your Pesach lamb, they'd allocate you into a shift. Now, what is it like when you bring the Pesach lamb? They'd get everyone into the temple, and they would close the gates behind you once you were in, and they would blow the shofar. You are responsible for cutting that lamb's neck. What do they call that when you slaughter? Kosher slaughter? What's the Hebrew word for it? Shchita. Shchita. So, as you would stand there and they close the doors, all the priests would line up in this long line before you. I don't know how many lines, probably a bunch of lines. Each having their own little golden cup where they would catch the blood in. Because they want to make it as fast as possible, right? Interesting, the cups that they used to use to catch the blood in weren't shaped like a normal cup or a normal holder. They were shaped with a sharp pointed edge, like an ice cream cone. Do you know why? Okay, well you can catch the blood in a normal bowl as well. Yeah? But you can catch it in a normal bowl as well. There's a reason why it's pointed at the end. What happens to blood if you leave it lying too long? Congeals and gets hard, and then you can't use it for the sacrifice anymore. So they designed the holders for the blood so that the priests couldn't put it down. It would just fall over the whole time and spill. So that they wouldn't get lazy and put it down and go do something else, and then come back and the blood would be congealed. Interesting, eh? So while you were doing your sacrifice, some of the other priests would be singing the Hallel. You know the Hallel, Psalm 113 through 120 something? That beautiful thing that we sing. We'll sing it, by the way, on Pesach Seder night and on Pesach day itself. We sing the Hallel. So the priest would actually sing this while you are busy doing your sacrifice. And in fact, they would go through it, the first 2 groups, they would sing it about 2 or 3 times and then everyone would be done. But when it came to the 3rd group, they wouldn't even sing it halfway, and everyone from the 3rd group would be done, because there were so few people left over in the 3rd group. Okay. So you would cut the neck, the priest would catch the blood, then he would carry the blood, and then he would throw the blood onto the base of the altar. That is what makes it a kosher sacrifice. These 4 things are a prerequisite for all sacrifices. You need to do a slaughter, shchita. They need to catch it, which is called kabbalah, which means to receive. And then they will carry it, which is actually the word halacha, which means they carry it there, and then they'll throw it onto the altar. What you do then is with your lamb, you remove all the parts you're not allowed to eat. So the organs that are for the priests, you take out, the tail you cut off, and you give it to the priests to burn or to eat, whichever parts they get. And you would leave then, you in your shift, whichever shift you were. And in the streets of Jerusalem, just outside the temple, they had a mass braai day. We think we're cool with our 24th of September, ne? They had a mass big braai that they got together for everyone. There was braais everywhere in the street. And they can come and they could roast their lamb right there and then carry it home to eat that night. Pretty cool thing to witness one day, hey? Okay. So, how do you cook the lamb? How do you prepare that lamb? What was the commandment? What did it say? Yeah. Or raw. You have to roast it. Everything in one. Not allowed to break the legs neither. Yes. Yeah, it's weird. Yeah, because now we have a temple and now we have a Levitical system. Yeah, it's much better if you ask me. All right. So, question: How would you braai a thing in its fullness, a full lamb? There's only one way we do it today. We spit braai. Were you allowed to do a spit braai? Why not? Because the metal pole that you stick through the sheep ends up heating up on the fire and it cooks it from the inside. You're not allowed to cook it that way. It has to be with fire. So there's a problem. We can't do that today. So what are we going to do? Any suggestions? Grill it. How? Not hout. Good stuff. A branch. They used a branch. But here's the problem though. Some branches have a lot of liquid inside. If you start roasting it with a branch and the liquid comes out, you are now boiling the Pesach lamb. Now what? No. So our rabbis told us that a pomegranate branch doesn't do that. It only comes out at the end where you cut it off. So what they did in the temple times, they would take a pomegranate branch, stick it through the sheep's mouth and out the other side, and the side that you cut it off would be sticking out of its mouth. And that way they would roast the Pesach lamb in temple times. Pretty cool. Yeah. Maybe it's got some flavoring as well, who knows. Alright, and of course they would actually, what they would do with the legs and stuff, there's a debate in the Talmud whether they should hang or whether you should fold it up on top of it. And they say that you should fold the legs up behind it, on its head, so that it's called, the Talmud actually calls it this, a helmeted kid. It looks like it has a crown on its head when you fold it up there. Which is very interesting if you look at the crown of thorns Yeshua had on his head during the crucifixion. Okay. And then of course you have to eat it that night. You're not allowed to have any leftovers after midnight. Today what we do is, to remember that, is we end off our Pesach Seder by eating something called the afikomen. Afikomen means that is to come. Basically it means pudding. After you've eaten the afikomen, you don't eat anything else until the next morning. That's one of the traditions that we keep, just to remember that mitzvah. Okay. What about Gentiles and the Pesach lamb? There's a commandment that says, no uncircumcised person shall eat of the lamb, of the Pesach. So, uncircumcised person means a non-Jew. It doesn't mean that all our Muslim friends who are also circumcised, and anyone who's been to Berg school and been circumcised, or anyone that's went by themselves to a doctor and got circumcised, qualifies for the Pesach. This means a Jew, a resident Jew, is the only one who's allowed to eat of the Pesach lamb. Sounds like a bit of a bummer, right? It's not that bad, really. This is the only prohibition, is the Pesach lamb. The rest of Pesach, any Gentile is allowed to take part on. You're allowed to eat matzah, you're allowed to eat the maror, the lettuce, all these other things you're allowed to do. The only thing that you're not allowed to do as a Gentile is to actually eat of that specific lamb, right? That's a prohibition. So, the Pesach Seder, you are allowed to do. In fact, it is encouraged that Jews invite Gentiles to their Pesach Seder. And think about it. Even in the days of the temple, the only people that actually ate of the Pesach lamb were people that lived in Jerusalem. Or close to Jerusalem at least. If you lived up north in Syria, or if you lived like Paul, when Paul was in Corinth, he wouldn't have been able to eat the Pesach lamb, because they're not going to speed, express, deliver it before 12 p.m. that night, right? There wasn't any XPS or Mr. Delivery. Yes, it's one of the 3 pilgrimage festivals. So you should go up there. But not everyone could always go, right? There's a lot of finances involved in pilgrimages. So there is a story, I don't know if I've told it to you guys before, a bunch of you weren't here a few years back, so maybe I should tell it quick, of an individual, a Gentile guy living up in Babylon. And this guy didn't like the Jews too much, but he lived in a Jewish community. And he would hear about the Pesach preparations, how some of the Jews went to Israel, to Jerusalem for the Pesach festival. And he wanted to, out of spite, go and join them, those that could afford to go, so he could be spiteful towards those that couldn't afford to go to Jerusalem for Pesach. So one year he went down for Pesach and he faked being a Jew. He joined someone for the Pesach Seder, because when you're in Jerusalem, you can tell people, hey, I don't have a place to eat tonight, and they'll invite you. He went into the house, he ate the Pesach lamb. Yeah. Yeah, he probably told someone, register me with your lamb. And the guy went and registered him. He lied to them and said, yeah, I'm a Jew from Babylon, wada. Yeah. And that night he actually ate of the Pesach lamb. He came back the next day to Babylon. Well, not the next day, but anyway, he came on the caravan. And then when he got back, he told the other local Jews in his community that he went to Pesach and he ate of the Pesach lamb, and those Jews didn't, to show off and to make them feel bad. So the rabbi in that town, Yehuda ben Batira, was very clever. So he said to him, did you by any chance get to taste the tail of the lamb? And he said, no, why? He says, oh boy, they've been holding out on you. That is the best part of the Pesach lamb. Next year, when you go again, make sure they give you the tail of the lamb. So I said, I'll do that. So next year comes around, and he goes down to Jerusalem again, and he joins in the Pesach Seder again, and he asks them at the Pesach Seder, I must have the Pesach lamb's tail. And they refuse. They say, you can't have the tail. He says, I will have the tail. I was told that it's the best part, and you guys are just holding out against me. And they said to him, who told you that? And he said, the rabbi from my town, Yehuda ben Batira, said so. And immediately they clicked what had happened. So they put him on trial, and they found out what he did, and they put him to death for eating the Pesach lamb. And the end of the story, the rabbis send a message to Yehuda ben Batira saying, even though you're living out there in Babylon, your webs go far and wide, even unto Jerusalem. Interesting story, eh? Okay. So today, even the Jews do not eat it. So it's not like you should feel bad that you're not allowed to eat it. There was only a select few that could eat it back in that day. And today, pretty much the whole world doesn't eat it, right? None of us can eat it today. Okay. So there's our Pesach Seder. Seder plate. We'll study this in one of our sessions as well. One of the things we're supposed to have, one of our elements, is the Pesach lamb. But since we don't eat lamb on Pesach nowadays, and we don't have it, we usually put just a lamb shank bone. Some people even put a chicken bone on their Seder plate, just to remind us of that. Mind you, there's an egg as well, just to remind you of Easter eggs. Yes, exactly. No. So on Pesach, there's also a festival offering brought as well, a bull. Not just the Pesach lamb. The bull is a festival offering. So the egg is there to represent that offering as well. Because you don't want to put another meat on there because it replaces that one and it confuses you. So what's the closest thing we can get to meat? That's not meat. Egg, right? What came first, the chicken or the egg? That's why it's round. Alrighty, we'll talk about that later. Okay, so let's talk about the Yom Tovs. The first day of the 7 days, you are to have an assembly set aside for God. These days, no work is to be done except what each must do to prepare his food. You may do only that. Are you allowed to cook food on the Sabbath? No. Remember, he who has prepared his food before the Sabbath will eat on the Sabbath. But a Yom Tov, you are allowed to prepare your food. That's the only one you're allowed to break, specifically. On a Yom Tov. Why? Because imagine if Pesach fell on a Sunday. You're not allowed to cook on Shabbos. So the Saturday or Friday night you can't cook. But then comes the Yom Tov on Sunday. If you're not allowed to cook then neither, you're going to have cold food for 2 days. For that day at least. So it's a big problem. So Baruch Hashem, he gave us this commandment saying you are allowed to prepare your food on a Yom Tov. Okay. So the first day this year is a Saturday. What does that mean? Still we can't cook. Sabbath laws override Yom Tov laws. So even though it's a Sabbath, we're still not allowed to cook, even if it's a Yom Tov this year. Right? We're going to add some extra prayers as well. But the 7th day this year is on a Thursday night through a Friday. Even though it's a Yom Tov and we're not allowed to do any work, we are allowed to cook. Even more so because it's a Sabbath the next day. Usually, if a Yom Tov falls in the week, then you are not allowed to cook food for the next day. You're only allowed to cook, what does it say? For that day. Right. To prepare his food, you may do only that. Only for that day. Except when it falls on a Friday, like this year. Then you're allowed to cook for your Sabbath on that Thursday as well. Justin?
Yom Tov is a Sabbath. So all the prohibitions are except for
cooking. Yeah. So it's a midweek Sabbath. So there's a prayer, you'll find it in the Siddur, right in the beginning of the Siddur on Friday night prayers, called Eruv Tavshilin. And there's actually 3 prayers for Pesach. What you do is, as soon as it begins, as soon as the Yom Tov begins, just before it begins, you take a certain type of food and you cook it and you do a little blessing or a prayer saying, I am preparing this food so that before the Yom Tov, so that I can continue cooking on the Yom Tov for the Sabbath. So there's a ceremony that you can do, it's in the Siddur, that's in every Pesach Haggadah as well. So it's basically a Sabbath, a weekday Sabbath, except you're allowed to cook. Baruch Hashem, otherwise we'd suffer. Let's chat a little bit about matzah. How often must we eat this cardboard? Once a year for 7 days. You would think so, right? Because it sounds like the commandments say for 7 days you shall eat matzah. But there's the verse. For 7 days you are to eat matzah, and the 7th day is to be a festival for Hashem. But in Deuteronomy, it says, for 6 days you are to eat matzah. On the 7th day, there is a festive assembly for Hashem your God. Do not do any kind of work. So did Moses make a mistake? They say being a vegetarian is a huge mistake. 6 days, 7 days. So our rabbis derive from this that the reason why these are given is because the Torah is trying to teach us a bigger principle that the 7th day is to be a festival for Hashem as well. It is not a commandment that you have to eat Pesach all 7 days or all 6 days. It's just that if on the 7th day, when there's a festival or any of the other intermediate days, if you want to eat bread, you are not allowed to. You should have matzah instead. So it's a little bit of a loophole that our rabbis found. So many people struggle with eating so much matzah for so long. So the commandment actually only applies that on the first night you must have matzah. Without a doubt. The 14th, the night of the 15th basically. Right? The first night, that evening, you shall eat matzah. That is a straightforward commandment that applies even today. But for safety's sake, if you can, eat it anyway for all 7 days. Why not? But here by the 6th, 7th day, you start getting sick of it. But, once again, that is not the direct mitzvah. That is just getting there to the overall idea. Why doesn't it say then for 7 days? So we're going to come back to this discrepancy when we study the Omer as well. Because when it comes to the Omer, the 6 and the 7 days is there to show us that one day it's possible that the grains that you got in this new year will not be kosher. So you can't eat matzah on the day anyway.
actually this not really about matzah, it's about removing the humans.
Yeah.
So if you want to eat something, you may eat the matzah instead of something.
Yeah, except for the first day. So we have to eat matzah. Remember, it's called the bread of our affliction. So there's a reason why there's also a mitzvah on that day specifically, because we left in a rush and we had to take that bread with us. Yeah. But for the rest of the days, you're not commanded to eat matzah. But it's a good idea, man. Get in the mood. Have some chiyas. Okay, what about rejoicing? Deuteronomy 16 verse 14 says, "You shall rejoice at your festival, you, your sons and your daughters, your male and female slaves, the Levites and the foreigners, orphans and widows living among you." It's actually a commandment. So next week we're studying Chometz. Keep in mind, you have to rejoice in the festival. Don't just be like, "Oh, I'm never going to clean my house, I can't eat this, I can't eat that." It's actually a commandment to rejoice. So we rejoice by wearing fine clothes, by eating festive meals, and by singing the Hallel, and by inviting guests. We have a good time together. We have to enjoy these 7 days of Pesach. And it's 8:15, so we should end now. So, there's a little message for you guys. Passover is coming soon. Don't be in denial. Denial. Okay, so that was our overview for Pesach. Um,